Okay, we're going to go ahead and get started this evening. Thank you for tuning in to our lesson. As you can see, I'm recording in a new place. I'm recording at home on the couch. So maybe I have surprised you with all the different places I've tried to record over this quarantine. But nonetheless, we're here in my living room, and we're going to be talking about probably one of my favorite subjects in the entire Bible. There are so many subjects that I like to talk about. I love to talk about joy, and many of you who are members at Bowden, you know that I talk about joy a lot, that Christians should be joyful. I love to talk about the church, and one of the subjects I love to study about is the crucifixion of Jesus. That's a very encouraging study to me because it reminds me of what Jesus did, and we've done that in time past. But tonight we're going to be studying another one of my favorite subjects, and that is the subject of friendship. As I've gotten older, I've come to realize the value of friendship, how much more important it is now than I used to think. Um, when you're growing up, it seems sometimes that friends are a dime a dozen. It's easy to meet people and it's easy to build connections with them. And, I played sports. You may have been in the band or been in some kind of social club or something like that when you're growing up. And, you were just around people a lot. And sometimes friends feel like they're everywhere. And normally, when that's the case, you can begin to take friendships for granted. But I have learned as I've gotten older, not only just the value of having friends and knowing people that you can spend time with, but I have learned the value of biblical, godly friendships, friendships within God's church, where we can meet one another and encourage one another and invite one another into our homes and our lives and become just deeply intertwined with each other on a level that is designed by God. And so we've been studying through Proverbs, and we've looked at a lot of sections from chapters 1 through 9, and chapters 1 through 9 are pretty consistent. Solomon constantly brings up the idea to his son: listen to woman wisdom, don't listen to woman foolishness or woman folly. Pay attention to wisdom, gain wisdom, develop insight, prudence, all these things we've talked about. Make sure you're spending your time understanding wisdom and how it molds our society together. It's like a fabric that weaves it together. When you use wisdom, life begins to work correctly, and you use the world the way God designed you to. And so wisdom is a huge thing that Solomon teaches to his son in chapters 1 through 9. And like I said, we've looked at a lot of different sections of that. What we're going to look at starting tonight is more of topical studies within the book of Proverbs. Now, I've told you this before. Chapters 10 through about chapter 30, 29 or 30, all of those are just proverbial statements. And so what we're going to do is we're just going to take topics within the proverbial statements and kind of just see what that whole section has to say about it. We're going to talk about things like business and marriage and family and friends and our tongue and our attitude and all those kinds of things, because Proverbs is just filled with information about all of that. And so that's what we're going to start tonight when we talk topically about the idea of friendship. And I've titled this lesson Cords Tightly Wound. And that comes from a passage in Ecclesiastes. I'll move our screen over here to this passage, Ecclesiastes Chapter 4, verses 9 through 12. And many of you have probably read this verse before, or at least memorized it, where Solomon basically just searching for meaning in life, and he's just finding vanity over and over. Everything just seems so meaningless. He talks about friendship when he says, two are better than one, because they have a good reward for their toil. If they fall, one will lift up his brother or his fellow. But woe to him who is alone when he falls. He has not another to lift him up. Again, if two lie down together, they keep warm, but how can one keep warm alone? And though a man might prevail against one who is alone, two will withstand him. A threefold cord is not quickly broken. What Solomon is getting at here in Ecclesiastes chapter 4 is the necessity of healthy relationships. And we actually went through this passage some time ago when we studied we went through a sermon series on healthy relationships. We talked about healthy relationships in the church and in our families and in our marriages and in the home and in the world. Ecclesiastes Chapter 4 is a fundamental passage for friendship. It teaches us that we as Christians need to have friends, that we bind together, that we are cords tightly wound, and that we hold one another together, because his conclusion is, one might not be able to withstand all the problems of life, but a threefold cord, you're not going to break that too quickly. In other words, when there's a support system around you, you're not going to break that support system very easily. So we're going to talk about this idea of friends tonight. I hope it's beneficial to you. Now, there are tons of examples in the Bible of friendships. I'm reminded of a few that are not going to be on the screen. If you think about Paul and Timothy, they were very close friends. You think about other people in the Bible like Moses and Aaron. Moses and Aaron, even though they were brothers, they worked together for the coming about of Israel, and Israel developing into a nation, and the Ten Commandments, and they both had some shortcomings, but they were tight, they were close, they endured all of those things together. I'm reminded of Jesus. Jesus was good friends with Mary and Martha and Lazarus. Jesus had his inner circle, Peter, James, and John. In fact, he loved John so much, he told John to take care of his mother when he was on the cross. We talked about that not too long ago, maybe an indication that Jesus's father, Joseph, had died. And John was kind of given the responsibility to care for Mary, Jesus's mother. So there are a lot of Bible friendships we could talk about, but two of the most prominent, the first one you probably could guess, is David and Jonathan. You remember Jonathan was Saul's son, and him and David were thick as thieves. I mean, they were just as tight with one another as they could possibly be. I'm reminded that David and Jonathan had this interaction in 1 Samuel 18, where we learn about their relationship. Jonathan made a covenant with David because he loved him as his own soul. You remember Jonathan often protected David from his father Saul, who was trying to kill David. And Jonathan made a covenant with David because he loved him as his own soul. That's a great definition of friendship. Okay, that's 1 Samuel 18 and verse 3. I'm also reminded of Ruth and Naomi. You'll remember the story of Ruth and Naomi. They had a lot of death in their family, and they were all experiencing some hardships. And Naomi decides to go back to Bethlehem, and she tells Ruth, you go find you a husband and all this kind of stuff. And Ruth says these famous verses in Ruth 1:16 and 17, where you go, I will go. Where you lodge, some translations say stay. Where you stay, I will stay. Your people shall be my people. Your God will be my God. Where you die, I will die, and there will I be buried. Man, what a relationship they had with one another. And there are so many more examples we could look at, but friendship is fundamental to the Bible. And so what we're going to do over the next couple of minutes is we're going to look at 3 points about friendship that Proverbs makes for us. I'm going to have the PowerPoint up some, but I'll mostly have my Bible app up so you can follow along. We're going to talk about these 3 aspects of friendship in the book of Proverbs that I think are super important. Hopefully will encourage you today. Here's the thing. Having strong biblical godly friendships is a key for us remaining faithful as Christians. If we want to remain faithful to God, we need to be surrounded with people that love God and that pursue Him and that let Him reign as the Lord over their life. And those people need to be influences on us. And so we want those type of friendships in our life. So let's look at 3 aspects of friendship. Okay, the first one is this. I'm going to pull it up, and then I'm going to go to the Bible app so we can explore the scriptures of Proverbs on this. But our first point about friendship is that Proverbs speaks of the value of a friend. One of the reasons we should be so concerned about having friends in our life is because Proverbs tells us they are so utterly valuable. Let me pull up my Bible app here, and we will start to look at some passages here in the text of Proverbs. Let me pull it up. Okay, so this is our Ruth 1:16 passage. But when we begin to talk about the value of friendship, one of the things we need to understand is that friends often are there for us in difficult times. At least that's what Proverbs tells us. For instance, in Proverbs chapter 17 and verse 17, you may know this verse well, even have it memorized. This is a good verse on friendship. Proverbs 17 and verse 17, Solomon says this, A friend loves at all times, and a brother is born for adversity. A friend, a brother, that person that sticks so close to you, they love at all times. And that implies to us that even in the midst of adversity, they're there to support us. Remember the men that held up Moses' arms and hands during the battle. Think of Jesus as he had the support of his friends during his ministry. Think of Jesus who went and cried with Mary and Martha when Lazarus died, and ultimately he rose him from the grave. He was a support to them. Our friends can be supports to us. That's why they're so valuable. They are not just there to have a good time. Friendships literally are there for us during times of difficulty as well. I've said this plenty of times. Of course, our friendships need to be most, densely found in the church. But I've said this so many times. I don't know how people get through difficult times without their church family. It's just beyond me. I don't get how that's possible. Because I need my church family in times of problems and adversity. I know everyone does. And so our friends can be there to comfort us. They are born for adversity and for difficult times. In many cases, if you go over to Proverbs chapter 18 and verse 24, we're pretty close, so we'll just scroll down. Proverbs chapter 18 and verse 24 says, "A man of many companions may come to ruin, but there is a friend who sticks closer than a brother." I know a lot of people that have just a ton of companions, just acquaintances that they have, and a man who has lots of those and not really anyone he can truly rely on, that's not super useful. But a person who has a friend that is there, is going to be there through thick and thin, that friend is one who's going to stick closer to you than a brother. We've all been there when friends have comforted us and loved us in the midst of hard times, and we need that. So a friend is valuable because they're there for us. And if we're going to be a good friend, we need to be there for others. We don't need to be a friend who's just there to get our side of the friendship. We need to be willing to give in friendship. And so that's part of the relationship I have with a friend. But not only are they there for comfort, but friends can actually, Proverbs says, be a source of great advice. I know I found this to be true. In my life, I have often strived. I don't know if that's the word. I've often put a lot of effort into finding people to put around me that are going to help me grow. Same needs to be true about friends. We need to surround ourselves with friends that are going to help us grow. They're going to give us good counsel and advice. Listen to what Solomon says in Proverbs 27. Proverbs 27, and we're going to look right about verse 9. Proverbs 27 and verse 9. Listen to what he says. "Oil and perfume make the heart glad, and the sweetness of a friend comes from his earnest counsel." The real thing about friends, they're so valuable because we should pick friends that are going to tell us the truth. It's earnest counsel, Solomon says in Proverbs 27 and verse 9. Earnest counsel. That is what makes a friend sweet. When someone earnestly will tell me the truth and love me enough to be kind, but yet tell me, in reality, this is how things are, especially if I have something messed up in my mind. Now, that's not the only job of a friend. That can create kind of a toxic friendship if there's always someone telling you, what every problem you have and every wrong thing you're doing. That can become kind of challenging. But the earnest counsel of a friend is part of their great sweetness. That's what makes a friend so valuable. But not only that, we see this in Proverbs chapter 11. I want you to see what it says in Proverbs 11 and verse 14. "Where there is no guidance, a people falls." Some translations say where there is no vision. Where there is no vision, where there is no guidance, a people fall. But in the abundance of counselors, there is safety. Now, this is not talking about the companion or the acquaintance we read of earlier that leads a man to fall. Counselors are those that stick close and give you good advice. So in the value of a friendship, they're there for us. We should be there for them. They give us good counsel. We should give them good counsel. I'm reminded of what Paul said in 1 Corinthians 15:33. We often quote this passage to our teenagers and stuff like that because it's a good passage. But we're often reminded of 1 Corinthians 15:33, "Be not deceived, bad company corrupts good morals." Well, the opposite of that true. Good company promotes good morals. And so we want to have good company. So our first point here, and let me pull our PowerPoint back up, and let me see if I can share that with you. Our first point in our series of thoughts on the Proverbs and friendship is that there is value to friendship. There is value. And we all should realize they're comforting. They give us good counsel. We should provide value in our friendships to others. It is a beautiful relationship that can exist. But not only that, our second point is that of choosing our friends. So we understand how valuable a friend can be, but the question needs to be, how do I choose a friend? How do I find the right person to encourage me and love me and give me good counsel and comfort me and be a close brother or friend to me? How do I choose a friend? Let's go to God's word and find out exactly what the Proverbs have to say about choosing our friends. I love this point because it's so practical in the book of Proverbs who we need to choose. Okay, so let's start with some friends you don't want. All right, this is just kind of good guidance in us choosing friends. Let's find some friends that we don't want. The first one I'm reminded of is Proverbs chapter 20 and verse 19, in which Solomon says this: "Whoever goes about slandering reveals secrets. Therefore, don't associate with a simple babbler." The first kind of friend I don't want is a gossiping friend. I don't want somebody who has a loose mouth and is going to say everything they hear. A slanderer goes about, he says, revealing secrets. There's a sense in which in a friendship, there should be a confidentiality of connection between you two, where you can share things with them, they can share things with you, and you have the confidence that each one of you is going to do what's in your best interest for your personal life because you trust them. They give you good counsel. You've surrounded yourself with good people. So don't surround yourself with someone who, when you lay something on them because you need to get something off your chest or you're frustrated or whatever, don't choose someone who's just going to go babble about everything you've said. You want friends who are not simple babblers. You don't want gossips to be your friend. So that's the first kind of friend you don't want to find. I don't want a gossip as a friend. But if you go over to Proverbs 22 and verse 24, we're going to read verses 24 and 25. We're going to learn that it's not just gossips, but we need to be careful about the temper of the people we spend time with. One of the reasons that you need to be careful about who you spend time with is that based on who you spend time with, that's who you're going to become. I remember my mom telling me when I was growing up, you show me who you hang out with, I'll show you what kind of person you are. And that's generally true because Proverbs 22, verses 24 and 25 say this: "Make no friendship with a man given to anger, nor go with a wrathful man, lest you learn his ways and entangle yourself in a snare." Proverbs tells me I don't need to make friends with someone who's just short-tempered and going to run off the rails at any moment. The reason being is that I might become like him. Now, we know that having a short temper is not the way God wants us to be. As a father with toddlers, I'm learning every day that my patience can often be thin, and I need to make sure that I am not being unreasonable with the people that I love and my children. And I don't want my children to find people that are short-tempered. I don't want them to copy my short-temperedness. So that means I don't need to set a good example. I don't need to set the example of being short-tempered. I know that if one day I want to be a leader in the church, I can't be short-tempered. The Bible is filled with these ideas of letting your anger get a hold of you, and that's wrong. And so I don't want to make friends with someone who's just going to be short-tempered and have a short fuse and always going to fly off the handles. That's not going to be a good person to be around. Go to Proverbs 25 and verse 18, and we learn another quality of someone we don't want to be around. Proverbs 25:18, we read this: "A man who bears false witness against his neighbor." So automatically what we're talking about is someone who's untrustworthy, who's a liar, who doesn't tell the truth. Proverbs 25:18, "A man who bears false witness against his neighbor is like a war club or a sword or a sharp arrow. Trusting in a treacherous man in times of trouble is like a bad tooth or a foot that slips. Whoever sings songs to a heavy heart is like one who takes off a garment on a cold day and like vinegar on soda." I mean, we could go on and on through these passages. Proverbs chapter 25, verses 18 through 20 are the ones I want us to focus on, though. We want to make sure that we're not a friend with someone who is a liar and tells things that are not true against others. We want to be with someone that we can trust, friends with someone we can trust. So we don't want to be with someone who's untrustworthy. See, trusting in a treacherous man in a time of trouble is like a bad tooth or a foot that slips. A bad tooth does you no good in chewing up your food. A foot that slips helps you not, it makes you fall. I mean, imagine, if you're walking on those slick rocks by a river or a creek and a foot slips, that it's like pulling the rug out from under you. And that's what an untrustworthy friend is like. They pull the rug out from under you. We don't want to be with someone who is inconsiderate, who's like vinegar on soda, who is like taking off a garment on a cold day, who sings a song to a heavy heart. We don't want to be friends with someone who's inconsiderate. We want to be friends with people that are considerate, that don't just consider themselves the most important all the time, or untrustworthy, or dishonest, or whatever. Another one is Proverbs chapter 1. That's actually 9 verses. Proverbs 1, 10 through 19. We're not going to look at those, but that tells us we don't need to be around someone who's given to violence, because we might adapt their ways. Proverbs 23 talks about being around people who are drinkers or gluttons. They don't have any self-control. There's just tons of examples. I mean, we could go on and on and on about the friends we don't want. However, we do need to make sure that we choose the right people. What we want in a friend is found in Proverbs chapter 13. Proverbs chapter 13, the Bible says this. Proverbs 13 and verse 20. Whoever walks with the wise becomes wise, but the companion of fools will suffer harm. What's the Bible tell me? If I'm walking with wise people, I will be more wise. I adapt to who I'm around. So I need to choose wise people. But the companion of fools, your life is just going to get harder and harder and harder. You choose a friend that is not intelligent, that's not using wisdom and good sense, and you're going to find yourself hurting. But you choose a wise person, and you will become more and more like them each and every day. So that's a type of friend we want. We want a wise person. Proverbs chapter 13. Now, if you go up just a few verses, we learn in verse 14 that we want to be around someone whose counsel will push us in the right way. Proverbs chapter 13 and verse 14 says this: "The teaching of the wise is a fountain of life. One may turn away from the snares of death." If I'm a friend with someone who is wise, they will not only be an encouragement to me, but they can be a leader to me. And that would be super valuable in my life. So I don't want to choose a gossip. I don't want to choose someone who's going to lie to me. I don't want to choose someone whose bad advice leads me in the wrong direction. But I want to choose someone who is wise, someone who has good advice, someone who's going to lead me in the right direction. Ultimately, as Christians, here's the thing. We want to find friends that are going to bring us to God. Just like in marriage, we talk all the time. You want to marry somebody that's going to bring you to God, going to bring you closer to God, going to help you on your way to heaven. The same is true about a Christian. We want Christian friends that are going to lead us to heaven, to help us get closer to the Lord. And so Proverbs tells us that the choice of friends is extremely important. The wrong kind of friends can be a corrupting influence, and a friend who is good and wise is one that we want to hold on to. We want to avoid losing good friends and pushing them away. We want to hold on to them. And so there is some wisdom when we talk about holding on to friends about our final point here. There is some wisdom about our final point. Let me pull our PowerPoint back up. And that is, not only does Proverbs tell us about the value of a friend, it tells us about choosing our friends, but number 3, it tells us about maintaining our friendships. This is probably one of the things that we need more than the others. Probably most of us know choosing bad friends is going to lead us down a bad path. That's just reality. But what we need to remember is that in choosing those friends, we need to put in the effort to maintain our friendships. And this is a super important point within the idea of friendship. So let's open our Bible back up, our Bible study app, and we will look at what the Bible has to say about maintaining our friendships. Now, there are some things that will disrupt our friendships. Let's look at the negative before we look at the positive. right? So disrupting our friendships, when we look at the negative, it will give us a positive thing to focus on, okay? So let's look at this. One of the things that will disrupt friendships, Proverbs 17 and verse 9, you remember? We talked earlier about someone who gossips. Proverbs 17 and verse 9 says, whoever covers an offense seeks love, but he who repeats a matter separates close friends. If we want to destroy a friendship, all we have to do is take the trust a friend has given us and betray it by sharing the information they've given us. That betrays friendship. That betrays trust between two people. So the opposite of that is true. If we want to maintain a strong Christian friendship, we don't repeat everything that we hear. We keep secrets between friends. I know that oftentimes we're told that secrets are a bad thing, and in many cases they can be. But when someone comes to you in confidence to share something with you, they teach us this in counseling classes, unless it has a direct effect on their life, if they're, talking about some problems with anxiety, suicide, things like that, you have to report that. If there are children that are being hurt, you have to report that. If there's something illegal going on, you have to report it. But outside of that, if someone comes to you in confidence, you have to keep that information in confidence. And so if we want to maintain our friendships, we need to keep things in confidence that are shared with us. Go down to verse 14, tells us this: the beginning of strife is like letting out water. So quit before the quarrel breaks out. What does it tell us about disrupting our friendship? You want to disrupt a friendship and end it quicker than it should be ended? Get into arguments that make no sense, that are senseless. They have no purpose. That is one of the ways to hurt friendships. It's also another way to hurt marriage. Get in arguments that have no point. You ever been in an argument and you've been arguing for so long you forget what you were arguing about, but you're just arguing because you know you're supposed to be arguing? Those are senseless arguments. And that's what Proverbs 17:14 says, that the beginning of strife is like letting out water. So we got to quit before that barrel, the quarrel breaks out and the barrel just explodes and water goes everywhere. We need to be very careful about senseless arguments. So that means, as a friend, if I want to maintain a good friendship, you know what I have to do? I have to ensure, beyond any doubt, that when I'm talking to people, I'm actually just addressing and arguing about creating strife over things that matter. I need to learn to let some things go. Not everything is a hill you want to die on. They taught us that in school about preaching. You have to choose the hills you're going to die on. Some things are just not worth arguing and fussing about. So that's how you ruin a friendship. You disrupt it. You get in arguments that just absolutely are not lasting. Okay. Another one is Proverbs 26 and verse 21. Proverbs 26 and verse 21, Solomon says this: as charcoal to hot embers and wood is to fire, so is a quarrelsome man or kindling strife. If I want to disrupt a friendship, I need to just avoid always being contentious, which is very similar to our previous point. But in essence, I need to cut that desire out. I don't need to just be always looking for something to point out about someone else or looking for something to nitpick about their life. That is not going to help me in any way at all. Proverbs 26:17, we're pretty close to that verse, so we'll look at it. We need to make sure that we stay out of matters that are not our business. Whoever meddles in a quarrel not his own is like one who takes a passing dog by the ears. I've loved this proverb since I read it about friendship. I don't need to be meddling in things that are not my own. I need to leave the ears of the dog that's passing by alone. I don't need to get involved. Some things don't require my involvement. That's part of the good comfort of a friend. Sometimes in friendship, there are things that you don't need to be involved in. Many of friendships have been hurt because people have involved themselves in affairs and issues that they don't even need to be involved in. I need to have the humility to realize that it's not up to me to be involved in everything that goes on. So I need to quit meddling in affairs that are not my own. Or there are tons of others. We're not going to look at all of our points here in maintaining friendships that disrupt it. But after the advice of not wanting to disrupt our friendship, not to offend our friends and push them away, but sometimes there are times where we have to be kind of quarrelsome. Sometimes there are things that we have to address, and we need to have confidence and know that friendship is sometimes about addressing hard issues. And so we need to be careful in how we do that. We need to be able to solve problems with our friendship. So in my opinion, and this is just something that I've picked up over the years that I've learned in my own relationships. In order for me to maintain a relationship, I have to know how to solve a problem with someone. Now, the thing about problems is if you let them fester, they're going to build into something that's much worse than what they were before. If you address it immediately and then you address every single thing and you always are right and you're never able to admit that you're wrong, you're not solving problems helpfully. So there's a medium there that we need to be careful with friends, but we do need to be willing and able to deal with certain issues. So when I have an issue with a friend, how do I maintain that? Because friendship is not always just going to be like, oh yeah, I agree with you. Yeah, I agree with you. Oh, we're just perfect for each other. We're 100% match as friends. We're never going to disagree. That's never the case. I've never had a friend where that's true. So how do I deal with a friend when we disagree? Well, Proverbs chapter 15 and verse 18 tells me one thing. When it comes to disagreements with a friend or a brother, I need to make sure that I am so careful to be slow to anger. Proverbs 15 and verse 18. A hot-tempered man stirs up strife, but he who is slow to anger quiets contention. I want to make sure contention is dealt with properly as a friend. I got to be slow to anger. I got to keep my mind and my heart in the right place. Don't get so hot-tempered and blow up on people. I have to be slow to anger. If I want to keep and maintain friendships, even in the midst of a disagreement, be slow to anger. Accompanied with being slow to anger is Proverbs chapter 18, verse 13, which is something that I think every person should be willing to ingest and do this. I have told myself time and time again, I need to learn this better, and I work on this a good bit. I hope you do too. If one gives an answer before he hears, it is his folly and shame. We all know people who jump in and want to be the first to speak, the one who's the most heard, and the last one to end the conversation. Some people just cannot help but insert themselves at all points in a conversation. If I'm having a disagreement with a friend, I need to be sure that I am willing to hear out my friend, to listen to them. Because if I give an answer before I hear Proverbs chapter 18 and verse 13, it's a shame to me. I need to be quick to hear, slow to speak, slow to wrath. James chapter 1, verses 19 through 20. I need to speak gently with people and briefly. I need to be quick, Proverbs 10 and verse 12, to show love. Look at Proverbs 10 and verse 12. Hatred stirs up strife, but love covers all offenses. When it comes to friendship, if your friends know you love them, you care for them, you can make it through any issue together because love covers up all offenses. That is, if I love you and you love me and we have a good, strong relationship, even if we disagree on that, that love is going to continue. Love outweighs disagreements so often. And if it doesn't, then maybe the love isn't as genuine as it should have been. You know, when we properly apply the wisdom of God that's found in his word, we can be sure that we will enjoy the good friendships of life and that we can look forward to having dear friendships that will help us get to eternity with God. Friendship is such a vital part of the Christian life. I need to make sure that I have strong friends around me at all times to keep me accountable, to give me comfort and guidance, to make sure that I know exactly where I'm going, that are a good influence on me, and they're there for the companionship that I need, because a threefold cord is not quickly broken. Jesus ultimately talks about being a friend in his words in the gospel. In John 15 and verse 13, he says, greater love has no one than this, than to lay down his life for his friends. John 15:13. He even goes in the next verse to say, if you're my friends, you do whatever I command you. My question for you tonight that we'll conclude with, are you a friend of Jesus? Have you done what Jesus commands? Do you have that friendship with him that is so valuable and important? If you don't, please send us a message, contact us, let us sit down and talk to you. And I hope you'll consider listening and enjoying some time studying God's word. Remember how important friends are. We need them, so make sure you reach out. The Bible does tell me in the book of Proverbs, one of the greatest proverbs about friendship, and then we'll conclude our lesson for today. One of the greatest proverbs about friendship is how to have friends. When I want to have friends, I need to make sure that I have a certain attitude. Now, we've talked about how having friends depends on me not being contentious and being willing to love. But ultimately, Proverbs 18 and verse 24 is the passage that we need to keep in mind. Listen to what he says. A man of many companions may come to ruin, but a friend sticks closer than a brother. I'm really interested in the Bible at how Proverbs chapter 18 and verse 24 reads in the New King James. I don't know why there's this variance in the text. Maybe we could study that at a later time. But in Proverbs chapter 18 and verse 24, the New King James Version puts it this way. A man who has friends must himself be friendly. A man who has friends must himself be friendly. And I think we all understand that. If I want to have friends, I must first be friendly. It takes initiative on my point. So many people, I believe, fail to have strong friendships because they believe they're entitled to those friendships. If I want to have strong friendships, I need to first be friendly. I hope this lesson has been encouraging to you. I know I have loved it. This is probably one of my favorite subjects in the Bible, and it has always been encouraging to me. If you have any questions, concerns, or thoughts about this lesson, please reach out to us. Thank you for listening. And hopefully we will be seeing you all again very, very soon. Y'all have a good night.